friends, and welcome to Dreary December 2025.
Woo!
We are doing short stories this year, one every week.
Yes.
And this week is Celeste's. What are we reading tonight, Celeste?
Tonight we are reading the story If She Bends, She Breaks by John Gordon.
Let's get into it. Intro music.
Intro music. Ben had felt strange ever since the snow started falling. He looked out of the classroom window and saw that it had come again, sweeping across like a curtain. That was exactly what it seemed to be, a curtain. The snow had come down like a blank sheet in his mind, and he could remember nothing beyond it. He could not even remember getting up this morning or walking to school. Yesterday was only a haze, and last week did not exist. And now, at this moment, he did not know whether it was morning or afternoon. He began to get to his feet, but dizziness made him sit down hard. "I know it's been freezing hard." Miss Carter's voice from the front of the class seemed distant. He wanted to tell her he felt unwell, but just for the moment he did not have the energy. She had her back to the stove as usual, and the eyes behind her glasses stared like a frightened horse's, as they always did when she was in a passion. "It's been freezing hard," she repeated, "but the ice is still far too dangerous, and nobody is to go anywhere near it. Do you understand?" Tommy Drake, in the desk next to Ben, murmured something and grinned at somebody on Ben's other side, but he ignored Ben completely. "Tommy Drake," Miss Carter had missed nothing. "What did you say?" "Nothing, miss." "Then why are you grinning like a jackass? If there's a joke, we all want to hear it. On your feet." As Tommy pushed back his chair, Ben smiled at him weakly, but Tommy seemed to be in no mood for him and winked at somebody else as though Ben himself was not there. "Well?" Miss Carter was waiting. Tommy stood in silence. "Very well. If you are not going to share your thoughts with the rest of us, perhaps you will remind me of what I was saying a moment ago." "About the ice, miss?" "And what about the ice?" "That it's dangerous, miss." Then Tommy, who did not lack courage, went on. "What I was saying is that you can always tell if it's safe." "Oh, you can you?" Miss Carter pursed her lips and again waited. "If she cracks, she bears," said Tommy. "If she bends, she breaks." It was a lesson they all knew in the flat fenland where everyone skated in winter. A solid cracking sound in the ice was better than a soft bending, but it meant nothing to Miss Carter. "Stuff and nonsense," she cried. "But everybody knows it's true." Tommy had justice on his side, and his round face was getting red. "Old wives' tales." Miss Carter was not going to listen to reason. "Sit down." Ben saw that Tommy was going to argue, and the sudden urge to back him up made him forget his dizziness. He got to his feet. "It's quite true, miss," he said. "I've tried it out." She paid no attention to him. She glared at Tommy. "Sit down." Tommy obeyed, and Miss Carter pulled her cardigan tighter over her dumpy figure. "Listen to me, all of you." Her voice was shrill. "I don't care what anybody says in the village. I won't have any of you go anywhere near that ice. Do you hear? Nobody." She paused and added softly, "You all know what can happen." She had succeeded in silencing the classroom, and, as she turned away to her own desk, she muttered something to the front row, who began putting their books away. It was time for a break. Ben was still standing. In her passion, she seemed to not have seen him. "What's up with her?" he said, but Tommy was on his feet and heading toward the cloakroom with the rest. The dizziness came over Ben again. Could nobody see that he was unwell? Or was his illness something so terrible that everybody wanted to ignore it? The classroom had emptied, and Miss Carter was wiping her nose with a crumpled paper handkerchief. He would tell her how he felt, and perhaps she would get his sister to walk home with him. He watched her head swing towards him, and he opened his mouth to speak, but her glance swept over him, and she turned to follow the others. A movement outside the classroom's tall, narrow windows made him look out. One boy was already in the yard, and the snow was thick and inviting. Beyond the railings there was a village, and through a gap in the houses he could see the flat fens stretching away in a desert of whiteness. He knew it all. He had not lost his memory. The stuffiness of the classroom was to blame, and outside there was delicious coolness and space. Without bothering to follow the others to the cloakroom for his coat, he went out. There was still only the boy in the playground, a new kid kicking up snow. He was finding the soft patches, not already trodden, and, as he plowed into them, he made the snow smoke around his ankles so that he almost seemed to lack feet. Ben went across to him and said, "They let you out early, did they?" The new kid raised his head and looked at the others who were now crowding out through the door. "I reckon," he said. "Me and all," said Ben. It wasn't strictly true, but he didn't mind bending the truth a bit as he had been feeling ill. But not any more. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. "Over yonder." The new kid nodded vaguely beyond the railings and then back to kicking snow. "It's warm, ain't it?" he said, watching the powder drift around his knees. "When you get used to it." "What do your dad do?" "Horseman," said the kid. And that was enough to tell Ben where he lived and where his father worked. Only one farm for miles had working horses. Tommy's family, the Drakes, had always had horses and were rich enough to have them working alongside tractors as a kind of hobby. "You live along Pingle Bank, then?" said Ben. The horseman had a cottage there near the edge of the big drainage canal, the Pingle, that cut a straight, deep channel across the flat fens. "That's right," said the kid, and looked up at the sky. "More of it comin'." The clouds had thickened over the winter sun, and, in the gray light, snow had begun to fall again. The kid held his face up to it. "Best time of the year, winter. Brings you out into the open, don't it?" "Reckon," Ben agreed. "If them clouds was in summer, we'd be getting soaked." "I hate getting wet." The kid's face was pale, and snow was resting on his eyelashes. "Me and all." They stood side by side and let the snow fall on them. The kid was quite right. It seemed warm. Then the snowball fight rolled up right up to them, and charging through the middle of it came Tommy, pulling Ben's sister on her sled. Just like him to have taken over the sled and Jenny and barged into the new kid as though he was nobody. Ben stooped, rammed snow into two hard fistfuls, and hurled them with all his force at Tommy's red face. He was usually a good shot, but he missed, and Tommy was yelling at Jenny as she labored to make snowballs and pile them on the sled. "They ain't no good. Look, they're falling apart." Tommy crouched and swept them all back into the snow. Jenny had no height, but a lot of temper. She was on her feet, her face as red as his, and yanked her sled away. "Bring that back," he yelled, but Ben was already charging at him. Tommy must have been off balance because it took no more than a touch to push him sideways and send him into the snow flat on his back. "You want to leave my sister alone." Ben sat on his chest with his knees on Tommy's arms. "Tell her you're sorry." He and Tommy were the same size, both strong, and sometimes they banged their heads together just to see who would be the first to back off. But this time, without any effort or even bothering to answer him, Tommy sat up and spilled Ben off his chest as though he had no weight at all. And as he tilted back helplessly, Ben saw the new kid standing by, watching. "Hi," he shouted. "Snowball fight. You're on my side." The kid looked pretty useful, pale but solid, and Ben needed help. "You done it wrong," the new kid said to Ben, and without hurrying, he stepped forward. The kid reached out to where Tommy was still sitting and put a hand over his face, spreading out pale, cold fingers across his mouth and eyes. He seemed merely to stroke him, but Tommy fell backwards. "You don't need no pressure," said the kid. "All you gotta do is let him know you're there." "You got him!" Ben had rolled away to let the kid tackle Tommy alone. "Show us your stuff." The kid seemed to be in no hurry, and Tommy lay where he was, one startled eye showing between the pallid fingers. Any second now and there would be a quick thrust of limbs and Tommy would send the kid flying. It was stupid to wait for it. Ben started forward to stop the massacre. But then the kid looked up. The snow was still in his eyelashes, and a crest of it was at the corner of his mouth, like ice. Want me to do any more? He asked. In the rest of the playground, shouts of snow fights echoed against the high windows and dark walls of the old school building. But in this corner, the gray clouds seemed to hang lower as if to deaden the kid's voice. I asked you, he said. You want to see me do some more? Tommy stirred, gathering himself to push. In a moment, the boy would pay for being so careless unless he had some trick and was pressing on a nerve. Ben wanted to see what would happen. He nodded. The kid did not look away from Ben, but his hand left Tommy's face, and Tommy did not get up. He simply lay there with his eyes and mouth wide open. He looked scared. The kid, still crouching, began to stroke the snow. He curved his fingers and raked it, dusting the white powder into Tommy's hair, then over his brow and his eyes. And then the kid's hand, so pale it could not be seen in the snow, was over Tommy's lips, and snow was being thrust into the gaping mouth. The kid leaned over him, and Tommy was terrified. He tried to shout, but more snow was driven into his mouth. He rolled over, thrashing helplessly. The kid paused as though waiting for instructions, but Ben, curious to see what Tommy would do, waited. It was then that the brittle little sound of a handbell reached them. It came from the porch where Miss Carter was calling them in. But suddenly the sound ceased, and even the shouting of the snow fights died. The whole playground had seen her drop the bell. She started forward, pushing her way through the crowds, and then, caught up in her anxiety, they came with her like black snowflakes on the wind. It was Tommy, jerking and choking on the ground, that drew them. It was no natural falling in the snow. He was fighting to breathe. And the new kid stood over him, looking down. Tommy, what have you done? Miss Carter was stooping over him, crying out at the sight of his mouth wide open and full of whiteness. Oh my God! Ben stared across her bent back at the new kid. He simply stood where he was, a sprinkle of white in the short crop of his black hair, and gazed back at him. Who did this to you? Miss Carter had thrust her fingers into the snow gape in Tommy's face and rolled him over so that he was coughing, gasping, and heaving all at once. How did it happen? But he could not answer, and she helped him to his feet and began walking with him. Who saw it? Which of you did this? She had snow in her fur-lined boots, and her gray hair was untidy. Her little red nose was sharp with the cold, and she pointed it around the ring that had gathered, sniffing out the guilty one. You? Her eyes were on Ben, but had passed by almost before he had shaken his head. What about you? The new kid was at the back of the crowd and did not even have to answer. Denials came from every side, and the chattering crowd followed her into the school. Ben and the kid hung back, and were alone in the porch when the door closed and shut them out. Neither had said a word, and Ben turned toward him. The kid stood quite still, gazing straight ahead, as though the door was the open page of a book and he was reading it. He wore a long black jacket, and the gray scarf was wound once around his neck and hung down his back. Ben noticed for the first time that the kid's black trousers were knee-length and were tucked into long, thick socks. They looked like riding breeches, and he thought the kid must help his father with the horses. But his boots were big and clumsy, not elegant like a horseman's. There was something gawky about him. He looked poor and old-fashioned. You done all right, said Ben. Tommy ain't bad in a fight. The kid turned toward him. There was still unmelted snow on his cheeks, and his eyelashes were tinged with white. His dark eyes were liquid, as though he was on the verge of crying, but that was false. They had no expression at all. He ain't as good as you reckon, said the kid, and left it at that. What class you in? Ben asked. Same as you. Didn't notice you. I were by the stove. Miss Carter always keeps her bum to that. That's why it don't draw no heat, said Ben, but the kid did not smile. He led the way inside. They had not been missed. Miss Carter was still fussing around Tommy. She had pulled the fire guard back from the stove so that he could go to the front of the class and sit close to it. But she was still angry. I'm going to catch whoever did that to you, and when I do... She pinched her little mouth until it was lipless, and her eyes needled around the room. Ben had taken his usual place at the back, and suddenly he realized the new kid had wandered off. He searched and found him. He was sitting at a desk no more than 2 paces from Miss Carter and Tommy. He had one arm over the desk lid, and the other resting loosely on the back of his chair. He was quite untroubled. Stand up, Tommy, Miss Carter ordered. Now turn round and point out who did this terrible thing. Tommy, a hero now, was enjoying himself. He faced the class. Ben could see the pale curve of the new kid's cheek and guessed at the deep water look of the eyes that they were turned on Tommy. Tommy, said Miss Carter, and obediently Tommy looked around the room. He smirked at several people, but not at Ben. He ignored him as though angry with him for what had happened, yet not prepared to betray him. But there was a real risk he would get his revenge on the kid. Yet again, his glance went by as though the boy's desk was empty, and he said, "Nobody done it. I just fell over, that's all." The girl next to Ben whispered to her friend, "Maybe he had a fit. That looked like it with his mouth all white, like he was foaming." "Be quiet." Miss Carter had lost her patience. "Sit down," she ordered Tommy, and for the rest of the afternoon she was savage, even with him. From time to time, Ben looked toward the new kid, but he kept his head bowed over his work, and Ben saw no more than the black bristles of his cropped hair. Nobody attempted to speak to him because whenever anybody moved, Miss Carter snapped. The last half hour dragged, but then, with a rattle of pencils and a banging of desk lids, the afternoon ended. The new kid wasted no time. He was out the door ahead of everybody else, and Ben did not catch him until he was halfway across the playground. "Where are you going?" he asked. "The Pingle." "We ain't supposed to because of the ice. I live there." Then Ben remembered the horseman's cottage on the bank, and he said, "Ain't you going to hang around here a bit? We got some good slides in the yard." "Ice is better." The others, charging out the door, prevented Ben from saying more. Jenny, with her sled, was being chased by Tommy. He was himself again and was telling her, "Your sled will go great on the Pingle." "I don't want to go," she said. A bigger girl butted in. "You heard what Miss Carter said, Tommy Drake. Ain't you got no sense?" Tommy paid no attention. "Come on, Jenny. I ain't got time to go home and fetch me skates, or else I would. I'll bring 'em tomorrow and you can have a go. Promise." She was tempted, but she said, "I don't want to go there. You know why." "I won't take a step on it unless it's rock hard," said Tommy. "I ain't going," said Jenny. At the school gate, the kid moved his feet impatiently on the step. It had been cleared of snow, and the metal studs on his boots rattled. Tommy had also lost his patience. "If she cracks, she bears. If she bends, she breaks. Everybody knows that's true, no matter what old Carter say. And I won't budge away from the bank unless it's safe." "No," said Jenny. Suddenly, the kid kicked at the steps and made sparks fly from the sole of his boot, and Tommy looked up. The wind dived over the school roof in a howl and a plunge of snow, and the kid's voice merged with it as he yelled, "Come on!" He and Ben ran together, and Tommy grabbed the sled and made for the gate. Several others came with him. Ben and the boy kept ahead of the rest as they rounded the corner into the lane. Traffic had failed to churn up the snow and had packed it hard, almost icy, so that would have been as good as anywhere for Jenny's sled. But Ben ran with the boy between hedges and humped in white, and the others followed. They left the road just before it climbed to the bridge across the Pingle, and they stood at the top of the bank, looking down. They were the first to come here. The grass blades, slowly arching as the snow had added petal after petal through the day, supported an unbroken roof just clear of the ground. Below them, the straight white channel stretched away to left and right through the flat white land. The water had become a frozen road, and the wind had swept it almost clear, piling the snow in an endless smooth drift on the far side. Tommy had come up alongside them. "You go for miles," he shouted. But Jenny hung back. "I don't like it." The air was gray and cold, and it almost smothered her small voice. "I want to go home." "It ain't dark yet." His voice yelped as though it had come from a lonely seagull that angled up on a frozen gust far out over the white plain. He began to move forward. "Let's get down there." "She doesn't want to go." Ben was close to him, but Tommy paid no heed. "Nobody's going down that bank, Tommy." Ben stepped forward, blocking his way. "Nobody." Tommy came straight on. His eyes met Ben's, but their expression did not change. His whole attention was focused on the ice below, and his gaze seemed to go through Ben as though he was not there. In a sudden cold anger, Ben lowered his head and lunged with both arms. He thrust at Tommy's chest with all his force. His fingers touched, but in the instant of touching, they lost their grip. He thrust with all his power, but it was air alone that slid along his arms and fingers, and Tommy was past and through and plunging down the bank. The kid, watching him, said, "You still don't do it right." Tommy had taken Jenny's sled with him, and at the ice edge, he turned and shouted to them up the bank, "Come on, all of you." "No!" Ben stood in front of them. "Don't go!" He opened his arms, but they came in a group straight for him. "Stop!" They did not answer. Their eyes did not look directly at him. They pushed into him like a crush of cattle, pretending he was not there. He clutched at one after another, but the strange weakness he had felt earlier made him too flimsy to stop anything, and they were beyond him and going down to join Tommy. "I've got to teach you a few things," said the kid. "I don't feel too good," said Ben. "I think I ought to go home." The boy gazed at him for a moment with eyes that again seemed to be rimmed with frost, and shook his head. "There's them down there to see to," he said. Slowly, Ben nodded. He had to think of Jenny. They went down together and found Tommy still on the bank. Frozen reeds stood up through the ice, and there was a seepage of water at the edge that made them all hesitate. All except the new kid. He put one foot on it, testing. "If she cracks, she bears," he said. Ben watched. The boy had plenty of courage. He was leaning forward now, putting all his weight on the ice. "She cracks," he said. But Ben had heard nothing. "No," he called out, "she bends." He was too late. The boy had stepped out onto the ice. Then Ben heard the crack under his boots, and the echo of it ringing from bank to bank and away along the endless ice in thin winter music. The boy moved out until he was a figure in black in the middle of the channel. "She bears," he called out, and Ben, who knew he could never stop the others now, stepped out to be with him. There was no crack this time, but the ice held. He could feel the gentle pulse of it as he walked toward the middle. There was something almost like a smile on the new kid's face. "Both of us done it," he said, and Ben nodded. On the bank there was a squabble. The big girl, protecting Jenny, was trying to pull the sled rope from Tommy. "Let her have her sled," she said. "You didn't ought to have bring her here." "It's safe enough." "I don't care whether it's safe or not. You didn't ought to have brung her, not Jenny of all people." "Why the fuss about Jenny?" said Ben to the kid. "I don't know what they're going on about." "Don't you?" The kid's eyes, darkening as the day dwindled, rested on him. Far away along the length of the frozen channel, snow and sky and darkness joined. "Why don't they come out here?" said Ben. "They can see us." "We can go and fetch 'em," said the kid. "How?" "Get a hold of that sled. They'll follow." Ben hesitated. Perhaps he was too weak to even do that. The kid saw his doubt and said, "You've pulled a sled before, ain't you?" Ben nodded. "Well, all you got to do is remember what it felt like. That's all." Ben had to rely on him. Everything he had tried himself had gone wrong. He walked across to where Tommy was still arguing. "See what you done to her?" the girl was saying. She had her arm around Jenny's shoulder, and Jenny was crying, snuffling into her gloves. "Ain't you got no feelings, Tommy Drake?" "Well, just because it happened once," said Tommy, "that ain't to say it's gonna happen again." "Wasn't just once." The girl thrust her head forward, accusing him. "There was another time." She lifted her arm from Jenny's shoulder and pointed up the bank behind her. "There was a boy lived up here, along Pingle Bank. He came down here and went through the ice one winter time, and they never found him till it thawed." "That were a long time ago," said Tommy. "Years before any of us were born." "You ought to know about that if anybody do, Tommy Drake. That boy's father worked on your farm. Everybody know about that, even if it was all them years ago. His father were a horseman and lived along the bank." "Hey!" Ben was close to Tommy, just like the new kid. Ben reached for the sled rope and jerked it. He felt the rope in his fingers just before it slipped through and fell, but he had tugged it from Tommy's grasp, and the sled ran out onto the ice. "Come on, Tommy," he said. "Come with me and the new kid." The girl was watching the sled and accusing Tommy. "What did you do that for?" "I didn't," he said. "I did it," said Ben, but nobody looked toward him. The girl was furious with Tommy. "Just look what you done. Now you'll have to leave it." Tommy had put one foot on the ice, testing it. "I ain't frit," he said. "I reckon it'll hold." "Of course it will," Ben encouraged him. "We're both out here, ain't we?" He paused and looked over his shoulder to make sure, and the kid was still there, watching. "Two of us, me and him." Tommy had both feet on the ice and had taken another step. "See?" he called to the others on the bank. "Nothing to it." "Don't you make a parade out there by yourself any longer, Tommy Drake." The girl pulled Jenny's face tighter into her shoulder and made an effort to muffle Jenny's ears. She leaned forward as far as she could, keeping her voice low so that Jenny could not hear. "Can't you see what you're doing to her? This was just the place where Ben went through the ice last winter." Tommy, stamping to make the ice ring beneath him, kept his back to her. "If she cracks," he said, "she bears. If she bends, she breaks." "Can't you hear?" said the girl. "This is just the place where Ben were drowned." The snow came in a sudden flurry, putting a streaked curtain between Ben and the rest of them. It was then that he remembered. He remembered everything. The kid had come to stand behind him, and they stood together and watched. The ice under Tommy sagged as they knew it would. They heard the soft rending as it split, and they saw its broken edge rear up. They heard the yell and the slither, and remembered the cold gulp of the black water that, with years between, had swallowed each of them. But now it was somebody else who was slid under. Then Jenny's scream reached Ben through the wind that was pushing down the channel as the night came on. She should be at home, not out here watching this. He stooped to the sled and pushed. On the bank they saw nothing but a tight spiral of snow whipped up from the ice, but the sled slid into the water beside Tommy and floated. He grabbed at it. From out on the ice they saw the girl, held by the others, reach from the bank and grasp the rope, and then Tommy, soaking and freezing, crawled into the white snow and made it black. They watched as the whole group, sobbing and murmuring, climbed the bank, showed for a few moments against the darkening sky, and were gone. In the empty channel, the two figures stood motionless. Their eyes gazed unblinking through the swirl as the snow came again, hissing as it blew between the frozen reeds. The end. Thoughts? You knew he was dead.
I think I figured it out pretty early on.
I think you're meant to. I think it's meant to be like the twist so much as it's supposed to be like he doesn't know.
Yeah.
It's a Sixth Sense situation.
Yeah.
Because when I was reading it, I was like, oh, he's dead. And then he was talking to the new kid, and I was like, oh no, he's alive because this new kid's talking to him. And then I was like, oh no, they're both dead.
Yeah. I think I do love a situation where you figure it out before the characters do. Like I don't love it in every situation, but if it's well paced and
if it's meant to be like a growing dread, because the audience knows that he's encouraging them to go to the ice, but he doesn't know that he's encouraging them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And that new kid is, he does not care if people live or die.
No kidding. Well, if you've been dead for a hot minute, I guess it doesn't much matter to you.
Yeah.
I, having never been dead, I can't say for sure. But thank you for joining for Dreary December 2025. If you want to support us on Patreon, patreon.com/drearymidnight. Follow us on Instagram at drearymidnightpod. And shoot us an email if you have story suggestions or topic ideas. drearymidnightpodcast@gmail.com. And with all that said, be wary of ice and safe travels home on this dreary midnight. Good night.
Good night.